All right, we're in the new setup. Let's go, gamers. We're in the new setup. Yeah, I moved my setup, as is apparent. That is about all I did. Anyway, today we're going to go ahead and go over the top 10 restricted pairings in Regulation I that is updated to be just after the North American International Championship that just wrapped up. That Federico C1, I can't remember how to say his last name, and I will not be attempting it because I suck at enunciating things. So, yeah, today we're going to go ahead and break down the top 10 most used restricted pairings. Let's just get right into the document. So, the best team in the format right now is Luna Rhydon with Whimsicott, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Ursaluna, and Incineroar. To very few people's surprise, this has been a very good combination for a very long time, literally since the beginning of the format. So no one's really surprised by this. Federico was able to pilot this to a win, 2-1 win against Marco Silva in the finals of NAIC, and it ended up working pretty damn well for him because he went almost undefeated. I think he only dropped 2 games. I think if he was 10-2 going into the finals, I believe, maybe 11-2, I forget. But he only dropped, I think, 2 games going into it. So this team is very, very strong. It's basically just fundamentals at the moment. You've got Murata and Lunala, which are stupid strong. Urshifu, which is ridiculous in this format. Ursaluna, which is ridiculous for some reason. Don't know why it's changed so much in this Reg G, but it's just really strong because it is mostly really strong into Miraidon, as well as very good into Calyrex Ice Rider if you play well around it. Incineroar is the best Pokemon in the game, and Whimsicott is a very good support Pokemon for both of these restricteds. So yeah, on the right of the screen, right next to my webcam or my face cam, there is the top 5 most individually used restricted Pokemon according to Munch Stats, which is where all the information of the most used sets and the most common items comes from, is all from Munch Stats. So we have Miraidon at number 1, which really should surprise nobody. It's been number 1 since pretty much the first tournament, followed by Cali Shadow, Cali Ice, Zamazenta, and Lunala. What I've noticed in this format is that if you do not have at least one of these minus one archetype, you are putting yourself at a disadvantage. If you're not using at least one of these restricted Pokemon on your team, you can get away with 2, obviously, but you mostly need at least one of these guys to really be succeeding in the format right now. Otherwise, things are kind of not going to go your way totally. So now that we're going over this, let's get right into the number 1 team in the format right now. And the number 1 team in the format right now is Calyrex Ice Rider and Miraidon. These two is my favorite restricted pairing. That's not true. My second favorite restricted pairing at the moment. I was an early adopter of it. So anybody else who followed is copying me, of course. But basically, these guys are a really, really good Tail Room duo. Calyrex Ice Rider can obviously be a 1 Pokemon Trick Room core alongside either Farigiraf or Amoonguss or Iron Hands, or really whatever you want to put next to it is going to work out very well for you. Miraidon is, again, the best restricted in the format right now. It is absolutely number 1. It will typically run either Choice Specs or Assault Vest. 90% of the time, it's running either Spec, Assault Vest, or Scarf. Scarf is like about 13% usage right now. And the other 10% is either Covert Cloak or Life Orb alongside Electric Seed and Leftovers. When it comes to Calyrex, it's basically running 2 sets. It is either standard Calyrex or it is Leech Seed Calyrex. There is a small amount of Seed Bomb that goes along with Kyogre, or there is also Assault Vest, which pops up occasionally that uses Crunch as well as Seed Bomb, just to kind of have a lot of coverage on it. Generally speaking, though, these teams are meant to hit hard and hit fast, whether under Trick Room or under Tailwind. When it comes to a typical team archetype you'll see, it'll typically be Calyrex Miraidon, Landorus, and Urshifu Rapid Strike. The final 2 slots can be swapped out pretty freely. Typically, you'll see another Trick Room Pokemon such as Farigiraf or Iron Hands. And then finally, you'll typically see something else that can be really good as a fast mode, and will typically be a Tailwind setter such as Roaring Moon, Whimsicott, or occasionally you will see Pelipper as well, because it also offers you Wide Guard as well as Rain, which is really good next to Calyrex Ice Rider. When it comes to common counterplay against these guys, really it's being faster and offering high levels of damage. Things like Ursaluna can be really good here. Things like Calyrex Shadow Rider can be really problematic if you're not careful. And in general and overall, these teams can really struggle into very high damage, into really high damage teams that they kind of struggle to get up Trick Room against. Obviously, Tailwind offense is a really hard matchup for them as well. Things with Kyogre, things with Calyrex Shadow Rider with a damage boosting item are very hard for them to break. And that's typically why they will have. That's typically where Furdruff is kind of extra good, is into those kind of Tailwind offense teams because it does it a little bit better into them. That's why Pelipper is a little bit nice in these teams because it offers Wide Guard, which shuts down a lot of those Tailwind offense teams with their strong spread moves in either Astral Barrage or Water Spout, or really whatever else you decide to put on those offense teams. Pelipper can just do really good into. In general, if you're looking on how to beat these teams, really just focus on just out damaging them, focusing on being faster than them. But you do have to be careful of positioning because Calyrex Shadow can be a really easy matchup for these two if the Shadow Rider player is not prepped correctly. So you do definitely have to be careful and make sure you practice matchup because obviously it's absolutely everywhere at the moment. It's at, I think, a 30% usage rate of this duo alone. I think it's about 30% if I'm not mistaken. I could be completely wrong about that. It might only be like 15. It might only be, I think it's only like 15. But it is holding a very high level of usage, and you definitely want to make sure that you are ready for this matchup if you want to get to any sort of high ranking in this format. Next up, to basically nobody's surprise, is Calyrex Shadow Rider and Zamazenta. These two, since the beginning of the format, has been a very difficult duo to go into and a very strong duo to use. Calyrex Shadow Rider is the king of balance. It's on every single balance team that you'll see because it just takes advantage of the tools that balance gives the best. And Zamazenta is frankly one of two partners that Calyrex Shadow really appreciates. The other one is actually the third most used pairing, and we'll get to that in a minute. Calyrex Shadow on these teams will either run Life Orb or Sash. They really don't run anything else. Terra Dark Life Orb or Terra Ghost Sash is typically what I see when facing up against Calyrex and Zamazenta. Zamazenta will typically do normal Zamazenta things. It will just run Body Press, Wide Guard, Protect, and Behemoth Bash. Heavy Slam. As much as it is still in very high usage, I think Behemoth Bash is overall the better decision and something that you should tech against specifically instead of Heavy Slam because it's going to fall out of usage the further into the format we get and the closer we get to Worlds. When it comes to the common team, you will typically just see a balanced core around them with Urshifu, Rillaboom, and Incineroar. Xianpao will also show up as an anti-Miraidon tech as well as it boosts the rest of the team. It's really good into opposing Calyrex Shadow Rider, which can be a very difficult matchup if you get the calls wrong. My cat is playing with her toy. If you hear ringing in the background from a bell, ignore it. It is the cat. Moon 8. Someone's got the zoomies. Someone's got the zoomies. Anyway. So you'll very typically see this balanced core with Xianpao around just because Xianpao is really good with Urshifu, Rillaboom, Incineroar, and especially Zamazenta. You may also see, instead of Xianpao, a Tailwind setter, or maybe you'll see sometimes a Tailwind setter in exchange of Rillaboom. Basically, though, you're always going to see Calyrex Shadow Rider, Zamazenta, Incineroar, and Urshifu. You really want to make sure you have some kind of defensive backbone with that Incineroar and some kind of secondary offense to help break through other things like opposing Zamazenta that are trained very especially bulky with something like Urshifu. When it comes to counterplay against these guys, Trick Room is an absolute pain for these two to go up against unless you do have anti-Trick Room options. It basically comes down to you need to fake out pivot, and if they have something like Furgiraffe on their team, this matchup becomes incredibly difficult to go up against. As long as you do have Wide Guard, it can be a lot easier to break, or can be a lot easier to get through those Trick Room turns if you are careful, but a well-played Trick Room player will just find a way to break through it and have absolutely zero issue going into you, so you do definitely need to be careful in that sense. Coming in at number 3 is the second Calyrex Shadow Rider partner in Koraidon. Now, Koraidon is very interesting as a more hyper-offensive version of Zamazenta in a lot of ways, as it just offers a ton more damage with its Life Orb boosted or a Calcum Pulse. Is that right? It basically just serves as this very much more hyper offensive version of Zamazenta and can be very, very effective if played correctly. 99% of the time, you will see a Wheezing on this archetype with Ability Shield Koraidon. It is basically standard at this point in time, and without the Wheezing, these two do lose a lot of what really makes them very, very strong. But it does also maybe open the door to having a different way of playing this archetype without having Wheezing and ruining people's normal game plans into it. Because normally, again, Wheezing is the typical thing to run next to these guys. So if you run something that's not Wheezing, maybe you can actually have an edge there. They will typically have Dondozo, Tatsugiri, and then either Chi-Yu or Ting Lu. I've seen both. I've also seen things like Fluttermane in the back just to kind of offer this extra form of speed control. But really their goal is to just punch holes in with the restricted and either finish with the other restricted or clean up with Dondozo. It just kind of depends on what the matchup serves. When it comes to counterplay, as long as you bring something that can help break Dondozo, Trick Room absolutely destroys this duo. They really cannot do much about it, especially with a lot of common archetypes. As long as it is not Taunt, Will-O-Wisp, Wheezing, Calyrex Ice Rider does very good in this matchup, all things considered, especially with Terra Water, to be able to resist the Fire-type moves and be able to lessen the power of the Astral Barrage. Basically, all things considered, you just need to be faster than it, whether that be through Trick Room or through Tailwind, because a lot of the time they will not carry a Tailwind option just because of how competitive the move slots are for these teams. And in general, you just kind of have to be careful of these very offensive leads with Chi-Yu, Koraidon, Chi-Yu, Calyrex Shadow, or just a dual restricted lineup. But if you can go faster than them either with Tailwind or with Trick Room, you'll be basically winning every single game against these guys. They really struggle to stay alive. Dondozo really is the big bulk bringer on this team, and without it, you can really struggle very quickly. Coming in at number 4 is the winning duo for the NAIC, which is Luna Rhydon. Now, for the typical team, it's basically just the NAIC team. You will sometimes see Whimsicott dropped for Grimmsnarl and the Choice Specs Miraidon dropped for Assault Vest Miraidon. But that's pretty much the only differences you really see in this composition at the moment. There's not a lot of variation here, but it just works, is the thing. There's not a lot of variation, but it just works. All things considered, I kind of already broke down what this archetype does. It's just a very strong Terra Rune duo. They're number 4. A lot of people are using them. It's very, very strong, very hard to check if you're not experienced in the matchup. And really, that's about it. So we're just going to move right on from it. Coming in at number 5 is my favorite restricted duo is Calyrex Ice Rider and Kyogre. And these two are very difficult to use. This is a very high skill duo, I find, that it's not something that can just be thrown together and just work, which is why I think it's not as much seeing as much usage as some of the other duos are, is that it truly is just a very high skill restricted pairing to use, because Calyrex Ice Rider is obviously very high skill in itself, but Kyogre at the moment has always been a much higher skill restricted to use, and a much more difficult restricted Pokemon to use in general, which is why I think we are seeing this duo be performing so well, because it is performing quite high, but it isn't being used by a ton of people because it is a very difficult restricted pairing to use. All things considered, you will very typically almost always see a Rillaboom next to these guys. It is just an amazing Pokemon next to them. And typically Basket Legion is also always here because it pairs well with Kyogre and it can dismantle the Calyrex teams, the Calyrex Shadow Rider teams, as well as opposing Ice Rider teams very effectively if you're kind of pinned in the back with Last Respects, or it can help blow things up very early with that rain-boosted Wave Crash. Grimmsnarl is also here just to add a bit of bulk because both of these restricteds are very bulky, very strong, and can very quickly spiral out of control if you are not careful around them. When it comes to counterplay, Miraidon is an amazing Pokemon into these pairs. This is also why, another reason why I think they're not used a whole ton is because Miraidon just does so well into this duo that it makes it very hard to really just kind of work around. All things considered, these two are very, very bulky. So if you can just kind of whittle them down, you'll often see either Leech Seed or Seed Bomb Calyrex. You can't really stall them out. But if you hit them with fast damage and you just chip them down, you will generally do pretty good into this duo. At a strong number 6, we see Zamazenta and Miraidon. These guys, basically, you will always see Choice Specs Miraidon here. And Zamazenta is basically just there to blank the spread moves, and that's pretty much about it, as well as to get rid of some problematic Pokemon, such as opposing Miraidon, as well as a couple other things like Incineroar, which can be really annoying for Choice Specs Miraidon. Generally speaking, though, you're basically just going to see an offensive core around it. This is kind of the new hyper offense team that doesn't involve a Trick Room mode. Hyper offense with Choice Specs Miraidon and Calyrex Ice Rider with Whimsicott, I think, is the tail room hyper offense, but I think this is generally going to be your tailwind hyper offense, with Zamazenta just being that defensive backbone alongside Incineroar that just gets really, really hard to break unless you have a ground type like Landorus or Ursaluna. But even with Ursaluna, it can be kind of annoying to break because of Intimidate. So really, unless you have Landorus, it's a really, really good defensive backbone. It can be really hard to actually break through. All things considered, these two just are very, very strong, and there's not really a lot you can do about it in a lot of cases unless you have Trick Room. Which, going into counterplay, Trick Room again is very good. If you have a Calyrex Ice Rider and an Iron Hands, there's very little that these guys can actually do against you, because Iron Hands will be able to blow up the Zamazenta, and as long as you can manage the Wide Guard and just kind of help mitigate how much annoyance Incineroar can cause, you will be doing absolutely crazy damage against them, because they do struggle to stay alive, except for Zamazenta and Incineroar. And just generally speaking, you're going to be sitting very pretty into this duo as long as you do have that Trick Room mode. Coming in at number 7, we have Koraidon and Lunala, the pairing that everybody thought was going to absolutely dominate the first tournament. Turns out it's the other bike that ended up dominating. This is the pairing that everyone thought was going to be really good come the beginning of the format. It is almost always seen alongside Brute Bonnet, Chi-Yu, and Fluttermane. Ursaluna can be swapped out for a couple other things, but most of the time it is Ursaluna still. You'll typically just see the standard Koraidon as well as the Meteor Beam Lunala here. You will not see any sort of defensive Lunala. You will often see an offensive Lunala here, because it just serves better alongside Koraidon as this very hyper offensive duo that can offer more of that tail room. Not quite with Tailwind, with Icy Wind instead, but you do kind of have that tail room-esque design. The Lunala just fits a little bit better on than Calyrex Shadow Rider does. When it comes to counterplay, Trick Room can be incredibly dangerous, and if you can dismantle those Trick Room options, Trick Room does become a very good option into this pair. But generally speaking, you want to try and move faster than it if you can. As long as you can play around the Wide Guard, this team becomes very easy to just kind of dismantle and just kind of move on from fairly easily with something like Miraidon, or really anything that can just offer a lot of fast damage that is able to outspeed Booster Fluttermane. Booster Fluttermane is the biggest defense here against those fast teams, and if you have something that can outspeed it and prevent it from getting off any Icy Winds, or alternatively, just take out key pieces like Koraidon, like Lunala before Fluttermane can do anything annoying to slow you down, you'll kind of just be fine into this duo, but you really just have to be careful of mitigating how much Lunala can set up Trick Room, managing the Trick Room turns, and being able to take out the key pieces, that is Koraidon as well as Ursaluna and Brute Bonnet, if you don't have a very good Spore matchup. Coming in at number 8 is Terapagos and Calyrex Shadow Rider. These guys are the basically secondary balance core, and you'll see again how you will always have a very typical balance core around it. You won't see Xian Pao as much because Terapagos can't take as much advantage of it. However, you will sometimes see Raging Bolt. You will sometimes still see Xian Pao here, but personally, I tend to see Raging Bolt along these guys just because it offers a load of damage that just kind of gets very hard to switch into. This is kind of the more offensive or more long game balance core. Terapagos is obviously kind of that checkmate Pokemon that you can kind of checkmate things. If they don't tear, they die to its partner. If they do tear, it dies to Terapagos. So it's really, really good at kind of checkmating things. And if you're not careful, can definitely get out of hand very quickly. All things considered, though, generally speaking, these two kind of have one game plan, and it's sweep with one of the restricted Pokemon, and they kind of don't have many options to do anything other than that. The other Pokemon here are pretty much meant to supply support for your restricteds or help pick off weakened targets with things like Raging Bull's Thunderclap and Scarf Urshifu or Aqua Jet Urshifu. And they can really struggle to do enough damage, especially in a restricted meta, if the two restricteds go down. Biggest form of counterplay is definitely Trick Room. Iron Hands and Calyrex Ice Rider absolutely dominate this team. It is very hard for it to slow down outside of Incineroar. So if you can help dismantle Incineroar quickly, you just win on the spot. Basically, if you have a Calyrex and an Iron Hand, you kind of win on team preview. It's very, very hard for these two to break through. In general, very bulky attackers, very bulky, fast attackers can be very difficult for this team to break down without Trapagos getting a few Calm Mind boosts. So as long as you can mitigate the Trapagos getting those boosts, you will often be able to run over these teams very quickly. Coming in at number 9 is a bit of a blast from the past. We have Swordfish. Now, Swordfish is the only archetype where you do not see a restricted Pokemon in the top 5, and that is very successful. And it's the only one I believe that can be successful in this meta, just because Kyogre is still very strong in this format. And Zacian is basically just a more offensive Zamazenta that's a little bit worse into Incineroar. Actually, a lot worse into Incineroar, but that's neither here nor there. You will almost always see this just being a team whose entire focus is to outspeed you and do ludicrous amounts of damage and blow through your entire team before you can really understand what's going on. It's very rare that you will see really anything else happen with this duo. It becomes very, very difficult to slow down if you do not have the correct tools. However, if you do have the correct tools, this team can feel very underwhelming. So just kind of be cautious of that. When it comes to counterplay, if you're able to go faster than with something like Miraidon, it will absolutely dismantle this team. Nothing switches into Electro Drift except for Landorus, which isn't even seen 100% of the time. There is sometimes a Rillaboom in place of it. So that definitely helps the Miraidon matchup. But overall, Miraidon is an absolute killer into this duo and can absolutely cause massive, massive issues. As a secondary note, just generally speaking, a well-played Trick Room team with Iron Hands can also do very well. So you do kind of have several options into this team. This team can also often struggle into Calyrex Shadow Rider if it can acquire too many boosts, as it's not super bulky outside of Incineroar, and it can be run over very, very quickly. The final pairing in the top 10 is Calyrex Shadow Rider and Miraidon, and this is the staple hyper offense team. It will often be run next to hyper offense staples like Chi-Yu, Shenpao, as well as Urshifu, and Whimsicott is there because it's the best Tailwind setter next to Miraidon, and Calyrex doesn't dislike having it next to it. You can be really mean with Encore and Disable with Calyrex, or you could just focus on setting up Tailwind, letting Whimsicott go down, getting in your second restricted Pokemon, and just clicking Electro Drift and Astro Barrage until everything is dead. You can also click Choice Specs, Dazzling Gleam, and Astro Barrage, which, barring Wide Guard, can also absolutely eviscerate anything on the opposing side. This team is very hard to switch into, and so that's basically their entire game plan, is just blow you up before you can move. How do you beat these teams? Well, you just move before them. They really struggle to stay alive. There's very little bulk on these teams often, which is why I don't think this is a very good restricted duo. Priority is really effective against these guys, with things like Sucker Punch being amazing into Calyrex and very good into Miraidon. Scarf Urshifu also kind of dismantles these teams, as it can one-shot Xianpao, Chi-Yu, and Calyrex Shadow if played correctly and with the right training. Overall, if you're able to move first and withstand the onslaught to get yourself in the position to move first, such as Trick Room or Tailwind that ends up being faster than them, or if they don't have Whimsicott, or any Tailwind setter to be fair. But mostly you're going to want to try and withstand one turn, get up Trick Room, and then just blowing through their sweepers and blowing through the 2 support in the back is really what you want to be trying to do. And well, that's all that I have for the top 10 restricted duos. Yeah, these are the top 10 coming out of NAIC. This will not be the same list, I believe, going into Worlds come August. It is currently June when I'm recording this. This will be going with the same day that I'm recording it, barring anything going wrong. Maybe the next day. We'll see what happens. All things considered, I basically I just wanted to kind of come on here and just kind of say I went through the entire fucking tournament and counted up all the teams. And this is what I came out with, was these as the top 10 pairings. So that's all I have for today. Yeah, that's all I got. Go eat some water, go drink some food. I said it backwards again. Go drink some water, go eat some food. I'm going to go do that exact same thing. Take care of yourself and go tell somebody you love them, because they can never hear it enough. And I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.